In the heart of rural Arkansas, nestled between overgrown thickets and winding dirt paths, stood the Grayson estate, a relic of faded grandeur. Built in 1853, the house had once been the pride of Jefferson County, its white columns rising nobly against the dense woods, its manicured gardens a symbol of prestige. But time had not been kind. By the turn of the century, vines had overtaken its facade like veins crawling across skin. Shutters hung loose, the paint peeled in long strips, and the once vibrant red brick had dulled to the color of dried blood. Locals called it Whisper Hollow. Not for the landscape, but for what they claimed to hear. When wind passed through the creaking boards, it didn't howl. It whispered. Soft voices, unintelligible murmurs. The sound of a chair being dragged across an upstairs floor, even though no one lived there anymore. Children dared each other to approach the iron gates. None made it past the front porch. The air around the Grayson home felt heavier than the surrounding woods. Birds avoided the treetops nearest the house. Dogs barked and refused to go near it. The few that did disappeared. And every winter, without fail, one light flickered on in the attic window. Just one. Glowing dimly through broken glass like a single watchful eye. For years, people dismissed these as stories, passed down by old men in rocking chairs and teenagers around bonfires. But no one could explain why the land around the house never grew wild, why snow never stuck to its roof, or why photographs of the home always came out blurred. The house didn't just look haunted, felt haunted, and everyone in town agreed on one thing: the house wasn't empty. It was waiting. The Grayson lineage began with Elias Grayson, a wealthy landowner who moved from Virginia to Arkansas in 1850, accompanied by his young wife, Annabelle. Elias wasn't just rich, he was calculating. He bought up land cheap from families desperate to leave the mosquito-ridden bayous, and soon the Grayson estate was among the largest in Jefferson County. To the outside world, the Graysons were perfect. Elias built the mansion by hand-picked masons, designed with Greek Revival elegance, featuring a grand staircase and hidden doors that were, even then, regarded as eccentric. But inside those lavish halls, things began to crumble. Elias and Annabelle had 3 children: Samuel, Margaret, and Lucien. By 1863, all 3 were dead. The official records say accidents. Samuel drowned in the nearby creek after slipping from a mossy stone. Margaret, barely 7, fell down the main staircase and broke her neck. Lucien, a fever that burned through his body in a single night. All 3 within 6 months. Annabelle never recovered. She was found in the garden one morning, her white nightgown soaked in dew and blood. Her wrists were slashed, and the family doctor declared it suicide. Elias Grayson buried her in a marble crypt behind the estate and reportedly began sleeping in the cellar. Never again in the master bedroom they once shared. People whispered that Elias had changed. He no longer attended church. He'd be seen pacing the fields late at night, muttering to himself. Some even claimed he began holding seances, though this was mostly gossip from housemaids and dismissed workers. Still, servants started leaving without notice. One allegedly went mad, screaming about eyes behind the mirrors. After Elias's death in 1889, the house passed to his nephew Jonathan Grayson, a former soldier who had served during the war and returned to reclaim the land. Jonathan was stoic, pragmatic, and attempted to restore the family name. He married and had a daughter, Eleanor. But history repeated itself with uncanny cruelty. Jonathan's wife, Clara, vanished in 1892. Some say she ran off with a pianist who'd performed at the estate's ballroom. Others claim she simply disappeared during a storm. Her carriage found abandoned, door wide open, no sign of struggle. Eleanor, now motherless, grew up with her father and an increasingly paranoid staff. Eleanor began painting things, strange things, doors that didn't exist, a hallway lined with mirrors, though the house had none, people without faces. Her most famous painting, the one beneath the house, was found nailed shut inside the attic long after her death. It showed a man, faceless, elongated, draped in shadow, standing in the basement corner, staring at something only he could see. In 1910, Jonathan Grayson was found dead in his study, the door locked from the inside. No wounds, no poison, just his hand clutching a letter that had no ink on it. Only a deep indentation, like the writing had been scratched off. His eyes were wide open, his mouth slightly parted, as though caught mid-sentence. Eleanor inherited the estate alone. She never married. She kept only 2 housekeepers and rarely went into town. Locals say she would speak to an empty chair at breakfast. She refused to enter the basement. Her curtains were always drawn, even in summer. One boy delivering milk said he saw her crawling on all 4s in the hallway, whispering to the wallpaper. In 1937, Eleanor was found dead in the bathtub. The water was clear, her skin untouched, but every single mirror in the house had been shattered, some from the inside with shards embedded into the walls. That marked the end of the 3rd generation. No children, no heirs, just a mansion with portraits that seemed to shift expressions when no one was looking. The town tried to auction the property, but no buyers came forward. One realtor who toured the place never returned to work. His wife claimed he stopped speaking entirely. Since then, the house has remained untouched, preserved by silence and superstition. 3 generations, 3 tragedies, each death stranger than the last, each soul seemingly devoured by the house itself. By the 1940s, the Grayson house had become more legend than landmark. Children would whisper its name on the way to school, daring each other to toss pebbles at the rusted iron gate or walk the perimeter alone after sundown. No one ever lasted more than a few minutes near its edge. Even adults avoided looking at it directly while passing by, as if eye contact alone could invite something unwelcome. The town of Holbrook, once closely tied to the Grayson estate through trade and employment, had slowly severed all ties. The last known housekeeper, Martha Lowe, left in 1941. She was a kind, elderly woman who had served the Graysons for decades. Her departure was sudden and silent. Her cottage abandoned, the fireplace still burning. A neighbor claimed to see her walking barefoot toward the river just before dawn, mumbling, "They're all looking at me now, even from the floors." Her body was never found. Martha wasn't the only one. Over the years, a trail of domestic staff had come and gone, some staying only days, others for a few uneasy months. Most simply vanished without a trace. One young cook, hired in 1934, was found curled inside the estate's root cellar, arms wrapped around her knees, whispering numbers in reverse. She never spoke again and was institutionalized under the name Jane Doe, refusing to give even her real name. By the 1950s, stories of the house intensified. Farmers claimed their livestock refused to graze near the estate's boundary. One man reported that his horses collapsed from exhaustion every time their wagon passed the Grayson property. Trees around the mansion seemed twisted, with bark peeling like burnt paper and branches bending inward, toward the house, like skeletal hands reaching for its walls. Holbrook's church recorded an uptick in odd confessions during this time. Dreams of faceless children, hymns heard backward in the wind, and an overwhelming dread whenever prayers were whispered near the property. The local priest, Father Monroe, made a single visit to the Grayson estate. According to his journal, he stepped inside the front hall, uttered one word, "abomination," and stumbled back out, sweating and pale. He resigned from the church a week later. The town sheriff, William Carver, opened an informal investigation in 1959 after 3 teenagers vanished near the estate's back orchard. All 3 were last seen heading toward the Grayson grounds after midnight, armed with flashlights and the invincibility of youth. Only one flashlight was found days later, its glass cracked, handle warm to the touch despite being buried under cold leaves. A town-wide search was launched, but nothing else was recovered. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just silence. Locals started calling the property the Mouth. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a living thing, breathing slowly, waiting patiently. Some swore it pulsed at night, its shutters trembling like eyelids. Others claimed to hear humming from deep beneath the ground, a low, tuneless drone that sank into their bones. What disturbed the town most wasn't just the disappearances or the madness, but how the house seemed to remember. Newcomers who didn't know the stories reported waking up with mud on their feet or dead birds on their windowsills after walking past the mansion. One man, a traveling salesman, parked his car by the estate to rest. In the morning, his windshield was etched with a message: "You don't belong here." No one ever saw who carved it. Even after years of neglect, the house never decayed fully. The roof never caved in, the glass rarely shattered on its own. Moss clung only to the trees outside, never the bricks. Mailmen refused to approach the property line. Electricity poles nearby often short-circuited, only near the mansion. It was as if time and nature respected its boundaries, or feared crossing them. By the late 1960s, Holbrook had adopted a silent pact. No one mentioned the Graysons. No one dared trespass. The property was left off maps. The town's new generation grew up with warnings instead of stories. Don't go past Miller's Creek. Stay away from the Orchard Road after dark. If you hear your name whispered, keep walking. It wasn't just haunted, they said. It was aware. And for every soul who walked through its doors, the Grayson house offered only two outcomes. You left broken, or you didn't leave at all. In 1973, decades after the Grayson estate had swallowed its last known visitor, something unexpected happened. A small research team from a historical preservation society, unaware of the house's dark legacy, arrived in Holbrook. Led by Dr. Lyle Renshaw, a regional historian known for his interest in antebellum architecture, the team was granted temporary permission to survey the abandoned property for archival purposes. The town mayor, hesitant but relieved to pass responsibility, handed over the original keys, long untouched and kept in a locked drawer for over 40 years. The team, consisting of Renshaw and 2 graduate students, set up camp in a nearby motel and began their work. Day 1, they only surveyed the outside. Overgrown hedges, stone walls cracked by time, and a curious warmth lingering around the attic windows, despite the November chill. On the second day, they crossed the threshold. The front doors groaned like something exhaling. Dust hung motionless in the air, thick and undisturbed. Renshaw noted that the structure was in surprisingly good condition. The floorboards barely creaked. The chandeliers remained intact. It was as if the house had been waiting, paused rather than abandoned. In the east drawing room, while photographing a broken mantel, one student, Emily Vaughn, felt something beneath her foot shift. She paused. Beneath the faded rug, they discovered a loose floorboard. When pried open, it revealed a small, rotted leather-bound journal, its cover warped with age. Inside, pages were filled with frantic script, mostly illegible. But one phrase repeated, always in the same hand: "It feeds on what we forget." Renshaw, skeptical but intrigued, took the journal with him. That night, back at the motel, he transcribed what he could. Between mentions of dreams, shadows, and the one with no face, one passage stood out. "There is a room that isn't there. It finds you when you are unspoken. The mirror shows the door, but only when it wants to." The next morning, Emily was gone. Her car remained in the lot, her belongings untouched, her camera bag on the bed. The door had been locked from the inside. Police were called. A search began, but no trail ever led beyond the gravel road outside the motel. It was as if she had never existed, except for her journal entry, hastily scribbled hours before her disappearance. The painting moved. I swear it blinked. There's something under the rug again. I think the house knows I read the journal. Dr. Renshaw was shaken but chose to return to the house one final time. Alone. He entered the attic. Dust coated the staircase like snowfall, undisturbed for years. At the top was a narrow door, bolted shut. Behind it lay a small attic chamber filled with decaying furniture and canvases stacked against the walls. And there, in the far corner, stood a painting. The canvas was nearly 7 feet tall, depicting a hallway of mirrors, each one reflecting different angles. Some distorted, others fogged. At the center of the hallway was a door, cracked open, darkness spilling from within. But it wasn't the painting that terrified Renshaw. It was the reflection in the nearest mirror. His own face, standing alone in the room, with a second figure behind him. He turned. No one. The air turned dense. The temperature plummeted. The bulb in his flashlight shattered. His breathing echoed unnaturally loud, as if the walls were listening. He stumbled down the attic steps, journal clutched in one hand, nearly falling twice. Once outside, he collapsed near the garden, vomiting violently. He returned to the motel, checked out immediately, and left Holbrook that night. 2 days later, Dr. Lyle Renshaw was found in a Denver hospital, catatonic. His left hand was clenched so tightly that nurses had to pry it open. Inside was a torn page from the journal. The only legible line read, "The house doesn't haunt you, it copies you." His notes, photographs, and research vanished during transit. The Preservation Society disavowed the expedition. The surviving student refused to speak publicly, and no further visits were approved. The Grayson estate was quietly fenced off by the town council. Yet rumors persisted. Of a man seen standing in the upstairs window during thunderstorms. Of radio frequencies going dead near the estate, replaced with static and whispering. Of hikers finding old photographs nailed to trees showing people who'd never been identified. And buried beneath it all, one truth pulsed like a heartbeat. The journal had been found, and now the house knew. By the late 1970s, whispers surrounding the Grayson estate had twisted into something darker. Less like ghost stories, more like warnings. What once was believed to be a cursed home had taken on a different, stranger identity. Survivors, though rare, spoke not of spirits but of reflections. Not of voices in the dark, but of hearing themselves say things they never remembered thinking. What the town once called haunted began to feel more like an infection. And it all centered around one motif: mirrors. Locals started reporting odd behavior after walking near the property. One teenager, Jaden Marks, claimed he stood at the old orchard fence and stared into a shard of glass stuck in the mud. He watched himself smile without moving his own lips. 2 days later, he vanished after complaining that he could hear his own voice whispering to him from puddles, doorknobs, and the eyes of animals. Other townsfolk experienced dreams of being pulled into reflections, where time reversed and voices sounded underwater. The dreams were similar across victims, though none had spoken to each other beforehand. They dreamed of a dark hallway of mirrors, of walking barefoot down a path that grew colder with each step, of seeing someone who looked like them, only taller, smiling with too many teeth, and always standing just out of reach. The sheriff's department once collected all surviving journals or notes left by past Grayson residents. Among them, a diary entry from Thomas Grayson III, dated 1871, described a moment that echoed eerily across time. "Father says not to stare too long, but the other me in the study's mirror blinks when I do not. I asked Mother and she cried, said it was the house learning me, said we must all forget so it can rest." This line, "we must all forget," began to appear repeatedly in later accounts. Those who entered the house and returned reported feeling amnesiac, unable to recall entire hours or days. Their sense of self seemed to thin out, as if something else had overwritten them, like a tape recorded over too many times. One particularly disturbing case was that of Lenora Tate, a state records archivist who took interest in the Grayson estate's tax history. She traveled alone to Holbrook and made the mistake of entering the estate grounds without permission. She never made it inside the house, but stood for hours at the main door, frozen. A passing postman found her standing still, arms by her side, eyes wide as if listening. When paramedics arrived, Lenora collapsed, muttering only one sentence over and over. "She didn't blink, not once. She wore my shoes." Doctors declared her psychologically sound but incapable of distinguishing memory from suggestion. Months later, Lenora took her own life. She left behind only a note with a drawing, a cracked mirror with a shadowed figure standing behind it, its hand pressed against the glass. From this point forward, the town's silence turned to fear. Those who denied the supernatural now spoke in hushed tones. The term mirror sickness emerged, describing what people experienced after brief proximity to the house. disassociation, vertigo, distorted self-image, recurring dreams, and in extreme cases, suicidal ideation. Oddly, no cameras worked inside the estate. Polaroids turned black, film reels melted mid-shot, and digital footage corrupted instantly. Even photos taken from the road looking toward the mansion blurred inexplicably. Only hand-drawn renderings seemed to hold any consistency, though even they varied wildly depending on who drew them. One artist's sketch, based on a childhood memory, showed the Grayson house with windows filled by rows of identical children, each with hollow eyes and stitched smiles. Another drawing from a hiker depicted the house with no doors at all, just mirrors where entrances should be, reflecting landscapes that didn't match the real surroundings. This distortion of memory and identity didn't just affect visitors. Longtime residents of Holbrook began forgetting details of their own lives. One librarian suddenly forgot her wedding date. A barber began referring to his daughter as the second one, though he had only one child. Entire family photos went missing from albums, replaced by pictures no one remembered taking. Photos of foggy hallways, empty rocking chairs, and staircases ending in brick walls. It became clear that the Grayson estate didn't simply haunt. It imitated, took bits of people, memories, images, moments, and made them part of itself. And as its hunger grew, so did its reach. The final blow came when Samantha Renshaw, niece of Dr. Lyle Renshaw, attempted to write a memoir based on her uncle's notes. She visited Holbrook, interviewed townspeople, and even managed to retrieve a fragment of the attic journal. The night before her departure, she left a voicemail for her editor. "I finally saw the mirror room. It's real. But there was another me already there. She turned first. And I don't know who came back." Samantha never submitted the manuscript. The file corrupted. Her recordings were blank. And no one has heard from her since. It was during the town's last documented attempt to tear down the Grayson estate in 1984 that the legend of the room that doesn't exist was finally whispered out loud. After multiple disappearances, the mayor of Holbrook declared the structure a public safety threat. Demolition permits were granted, and a team from nearby Pine Bluff was contracted to handle the job. Armed with heavy machinery, structural engineers, and legal clearance, the crew arrived one cold January morning. They never made it past the third day. On day one, they surveyed the estate's boundaries. On day two, they gutted the outer walls of the west wing, what should have been straightforward demolition. But something wasn't right. One worker reported hearing doors slamming in parts of the house that had already been cleared of fixtures. Another said he kept losing his way in hallways that shouldn't have had more than one turn. By evening, 2 crew members quit on the spot. The others dismissed it as nerves. On day 3, they broke through a rear parlor wall, only to discover a hallway none of the architectural blueprints accounted for. It stretched unnaturally long, dustless, with light that didn't flicker. The walls were lined with faded portraits, each one featureless. Blurred faces in 19th century attire, like someone had attempted to erase identities instead of preserve them. At the end of the hallway was a door. Unlike the others in the mansion, ornate, Victorian, dark wood. This one was gray, flat, modern, and entirely out of place. It had no knob, only a smooth surface and a single crack running vertically down the center. Written just above it, in charcoal smudges, "This is the room you're not supposed to find." What happened next is sourced only from a surviving crewman named Victor Hale, who fled Holbrook the next morning and refused interviews for nearly a decade. In a later statement given to an Arkansas folklore researcher, Hale described what he remembered. The door opened when no one touched it, just creaked inward. It was darker than black inside, like no walls or floor, just a drop. One guy tossed in a bolt. Never heard it land. Hale continued, "We saw something move in there. Not a person. A shape, like a curtain underwater. And the portraits in the hallway, they had faces when we came back out. Ours. All of ours." By morning, the hallway was gone. Behind the broken parlor wall stood only the original bricks, sealed like they'd never been disturbed. The gray door? Gone. The portraits? Never found. But Victor Hale had a photograph he'd taken on impulse. A blurry, overexposed frame showing a hallway that shimmered strangely, like a reflection caught mid-breath. After that, the demolition was halted. The company sued the town for undisclosed trauma and breach of safety assurances. The Grayson house was once again abandoned. But the rumors changed. Now, people spoke of the room that finds you, that if you spent too long inside the estate, or even thought about it too clearly, it would remember you. And when it did, the room would make space for you. A space that wasn't on any map. A space between memory and forgetting. This is where the Grayson house becomes different from other haunted places. It doesn't chase. It doesn't scare with footsteps or slamming doors. It waits until you notice something that doesn't belong. A stair that wasn't there yesterday. A door that closes slightly more than it opens. A photo that has you smiling in a room you've never been in. And then it offers you a choice. Enter the room, or let the room become you. One former town councilman, who anonymously confessed in 1991, said that as a child, he once saw a door appear in the Grayson library while his father attended to legal paperwork there. Pulsed slightly, as if breathing. When he returned years later as an adult, he found the same door, but this time it wasn't closed. He never walked through it, but in every mirror afterward, he saw himself walking. He never slept well again. The room isn't just a place. It's a reflection of something deeper, something sentient, something reconstructing reality from inside out. It edits timelines. It distorts lineage. People connected to the house begin to question whether they ever had siblings, or if their parents were who they remembered. Birth certificates vanish. Hospital records mismatch blood types. Identity becomes an unraveling thread. And when you tug too hard, you end up inside the room. To this day, no official record confirms the room's existence. Every attempt to document its presence by word, by image, by voice corrupts. Yet every generation in Holbrook seems to know of it instinctively. Children born near the estate will draw a door with no knob. Teenagers will dream of gray wood and featureless portraits. And those who return to Holbrook after years away, they often stop mid-sentence, stare at their reflection, and whisper, "I don't remember ever leaving." It wasn't until 1999 that the legend of the Grayson estate stopped being folklore and became evidence. That winter, a national true crime podcast called Rust Creek Recordings decided to do a live Halloween special from the most documented haunted site in Arkansas. With all legal permissions secured, they arrived with a full team, 2 hosts, 3 cameramen, a tech crew, and a historian named Margot Ellison, who'd spent 5 years collecting oral histories from Holbrook's older residents. They weren't the first outsiders to enter, but they were the last to leave together. Their plan was simple. Spend 72 hours in the mansion, document every corner, and sleep in rotating shifts. Everything was backed up to an off-site cloud server. Body cams, handhelds, satellite audio relays. The crew joked on air that they'd finally proved the house was just creaky wood and good bourbon. For the first 36 hours, nothing happened. Then one of the body cams went missing. It had been on the dining table filming the crew. The footage cut out at 2:14 a.m., just static. No footsteps, no removal, just gone. Margot noted this was consistent with a pattern. The estate didn't react immediately. It watched first. The next morning, one crew member, Terry Holt, a 24-year-old sound tech, was gone. His sleeping bag was empty. No blood, no signs of struggle, no open windows. The team panicked, but still tried to keep recording. They told themselves Terry had walked off. Sleepwalking. A joke. They radioed the local sheriff and were told help was on the way. But no help came. That night, the house began to shift. Walls extended where none existed before. A staircase appeared where only wallpaper had been. The sound team reported echoes that didn't match their own movements, delayed by milliseconds, yet somehow responding. Margot swore she saw herself walk past her in the second-floor mirror hallway. Not a reflection, a duplication. By the 60th hour, 2 more people were missing. The historian Margot began to unravel. She locked herself in the study and scribbled notes obsessively, all of them repeating one line. "It does not like forgetting. It needs a family." This chilling phrase began to echo the estate's earlier diaries, particularly from the mid-1800s. where Thomas Grayson III wrote about the house replacing what it loses and rebuilding bloodlines with borrowed memory. The theory Margot finally said aloud, on the last working audio file the cloud recovered, was that the house wasn't haunted. It was hungry for pattern, for familiarity, for lineage, that it had become a self-aware structure obsessed with maintaining a version of the Grayson family, even if it meant fabricating it. When it couldn't find a Grayson, it would make one. Rooms would appear to fit a missing daughter. Books would rewrite to align with a false grandfather. Portraits altered themselves, changing bone structure and clothing to better reflect the current occupants. Terry, she whispered, might not have been taken. He might have been rewritten. That's when the power died. The live stream cut off. The emergency crew sent to extract them found no one inside. But here's the part that changed everything. On the fourth day, the police received a call from a number that traced back to the Grayson estate landline. The voice was Margot's. "I'm home now," she said. "Tell them not to come. I know where the plates go. I remember the lullaby." Click. When investigators finally breached the home again, they found no trace of the crew. Just 12 place settings on the dining room table, each plate with a name card. Each card matched a missing person. In the corner of the room was a dusty phonograph, playing a recording that hadn't existed before. A woman's voice, gentle, humming something like a lullaby with a verse added. "One by one, we come to stay. Inside these walls, we don't decay. We eat what's lost, we shape, we play. The house remembers. We obey." After that, the house was sealed off permanently by federal order. But Holbrook never recovered. Residents reported new names appearing on their mailboxes. Photos they didn't take showed up in their family albums. Children started referring to grandparents who'd never existed. The local clinic saw a rise in dissociative episodes and false memory syndromes. But every MRI came back normal. Nothing was wrong with their brains. Something was wrong with what they remembered. To this day, when someone disappears in Holbrook, the police rarely search the woods. They check the attic. They count the place settings. They check to see if a new portrait has appeared. Because the Grayson estate doesn't take people the way other haunted houses do. It doesn't scream. It doesn't leave blood trails or drag bodies. It absorbs them, rewrites them, makes them part of its story, forever. Today, Holbrook is little more than a ghost of itself. The town's population has dwindled to under 500. Most homes stand empty, their mailboxes rusted, front doors left ajar like forgotten memories. Tourists rarely come anymore. Not because they aren't curious, but because the directions don't always work. GPS signals blink out. Roads loop. Locals say the town moves just slightly, just enough to shake off anyone looking too closely. The Grayson estate still stands, sealed behind steel fencing and guarded by motion sensors, though nobody's really sure who monitors them. No public ownership is listed. The house is no longer on Google Maps. But strange occurrences continue. In 2017, a local teenager named Jamie Keller vanished on his way home from school. A week later, his voice was picked up on a police scanner reciting an 1800s nursery rhyme only known through Grayson family journals. "Little eyes, little bones, keep them quiet, keep them home." In 2020, a visiting journalist took a photo of the estate from afar. When he developed the image, the house was gone. But a family of 5 stood in its place, all dressed in 19th century clothing, smiling stiffly. Nobody could identify them. In Holbrook's modest museum, there's a single protected exhibit, a small, black and white photo labeled, "The Family That Wasn't." No one remembers placing it there. And then there are the dreams. Residents whisper of recurring visions. A gray hallway, a door with no knob, a woman humming softly behind it. Some claim they wake up with dirt under their nails, mud on their shoes, like they'd walked somewhere far away in their sleep. Others speak of hearing dinner plates clink when they're alone at night. No one talks about moving into the Grayson estate. But every few years, someone new arrives in Holbrook, claiming their family has always been here. No record, no background, no questions asked. And the town accepts them. Because somewhere, beneath all the missing blueprints, the rewritten stories, and the portraits with unfamiliar eyes. One truth still echoes. The house doesn't haunt. It remembers.